This is Hunt Nebraska, the official podcast for insight into Nebraska's hunting and shooting sports community. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, our space for sharing stories, information, tips, and techniques. Now, Hunt Nebraska.
Welcome back to Hunt Nebraska. We're back in the studio today with none other than Jeff Rawlinson, Jackson Ellis, and Hunter Nikolai. You may see that Hershey is not with us today. He's out doing way better stuff than we're doing, sitting in here in the cool weather. But today we're going to talk a little bit about shed hunting, what we kind of look for this time of year, and then we'll get into something a little louder, such as predator calling, as you can see here on our table. Jeff? Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for that wonderful intro where you said I was better than the others and I was more entertaining than the others.
Right, yes,
yep. Something like that.
I didn't hear that. Did I black out?
Well, did you? It was inferred. I mean, okay. I'd have her say it again, but there's no need to. Anyway, welcome back, folks. We're having a good time. In fact, the conversation always starts before we get to the table, which I think is what we have fun anyway, but it just makes a lot of fun. But it's cold here. We're talking late January here, almost into February, and start picking up the conversation as to what are the things we're still doing. Of course, we're still goose hunting at big time. Predator hunting is really picking up right now. We're going to get into that. Still got small game seasons, upland game seasons in play, but there's another season that's coming up. The Jackson, I know this is one that you live for.
It's one of my favorites.
It really is. And a lot of us, it's kind of happenstance. We're out doing some scouting or whatever. Oh, then look, there's an antler. But you kind of go way out on this. This is the shed antler season.
It's kind of I maybe take it to the extreme. I've been accused of that before.
You might take a lot of things to the extreme, Jackson. Let's just put it that way.
That's fair.
But it is a ton of fun. And Hunter and Kayla, I don't know if you guys get in on shed antler hunting. I do, but it's not like what he does. Mine isn't, I don't have it on my calendar and I don't buy certain boots for it and have shed antler hunting gear, which I think would be a really cool name for hunting gear, shed antler hunting gear. I think that would be kind of cool. But anyhow, I don't go to that extreme. You actually take time off, you're out in the field, you get the dog involved. I mean, it's a big deal. What's going on with you right now?
Yeah, so I don't know if I take time off, but I definitely have some dates set aside, marked on the calendar.
You're not fooling anyone, Jackson.
You didn't mean to say that. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but anyway, go ahead.
But we're getting ready for it. It's I'm sure some sheds have already hit the ground. The bulk of them, not quite yet, maybe. Yeah, but we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. I know some people that have been out and had some success already. We're getting to that time of the year.
So deer lose their antlers every year.
Yeah, that's the cool thing. The neat thing about deer, moose, elk, they shed their antlers every year, which is fascinating because it's one of the fastest growing material or organic tissues. Yep. So I find it fascinating. Yeah. I love the velvet process. I love seeing them in velvet. Obviously, hunting them hard-horned, and then if we don't harvest them, then we can go out and collect those sheds. I've got couple of sets from bucks from years.
Folks, let's just understand what he's telling you here. If you go into his office, which is really more of a shed antler museum, but if you go into the shed antler museum that is known as Jackson Ellis's office, you will see piles of shed antlers on the floor. Now, that pile changes from year to year. All of a sudden, the pile's gone, and then we start seeing an accumulation of a new forming pile. and it could be elk spikes, it could be whitetail or muley. You just wonder where he's at all the time to find all these things. Because he's not finding them all in the same location. I know that for he's not that good. But so you're out there looking for antlers. How do you go about doing that?
First thing is having a good idea of what the deer are doing this time of year. And what are deer doing this time of year? They're eating. And they're eating and they're bedding. It's cold. I mean, what was it this morning? 10 degrees and blowing?
Too cold.
Yeah, so they're putting the feed bags on. So they're hitting the cornfields, mainly cornfields and beans. If there's certain fields that maybe didn't get harvested well, or there's some standing beans, that can be great. And then their bedding areas. And their bedding areas have changed from summer and fall because now they don't want to have to travel as far. Food is energy and energy is life. And so they're trying to expend as little energy as possible to survive through these months. Sure. So the distance from the fields to the bedding is decreasing significantly. Sure. And the thing with deer now is that, you hear a lot of hunters say it, they're either seeing tons of deer when they're out there, late season hunting, or they're not seeing any deer, because deer have a typical winter range, and it shrinks considerably. And all the deer, you hear about it in the northern woods, they yard up, right? And it's similar in Nebraska. You'll
For me, they started that in November, but go ahead. Yeah.
But yeah, so you may be, if you're not seeing deer, you're not seeing the sign this time of year, you may need to think about looking elsewhere. Yeah. And the great thing is, we talk about access a lot, and deer hunting access is sometimes difficult to get on private lands. But if you approach somebody and just ask to walk around and look for sheds, 99% of the time, I've some of the farms that I hunt, I've got permission only to shed hunt the surrounding areas.
Sure.
But
and no one tells you, I'm sorry, I'm saving all the shed antlers for my nephew, or like they might do for deer. This is pretty carte blanche. Permission's pretty readily available if you just ask. So and in Hunter, Wisconsin, I never hear of big antlers coming out. Deer must not lose their antlers in Wisconsin.
Apparently not,
because I don't think they shed hunt there. We do that in Nebraska. It's a big deal here in the Nebraska state. So anyway, shed hunting now, it's going to continue on now till what, March or so? Yeah.
Last year, the last shed I found was early April.
Early April.
Yeah.
That's turkey hunting fodder right there.
I think I maybe mentioned it on a previous podcast, but there was a buck that I knew he made it through the season, and I was really hoping to find his sheds. And early March maybe, me and Katie went in and drove up to the spot, and he went running across we went out to look for sheds after work. And we pull up to the spot, and he goes running across the field, both antlers still on his head.
Yeah.
And I never did find both sides, but I found one, and it was fairly fresh on I believe it was one of the first couple of days of April.
Well, and to give you an idea, folks, of how long this can last, those antlers on the head. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, and they bow hunting for turkeys. And behind me walked one of the nicer bucks I've ever seen on this property, full antlers. Wow. Full antlers. And this is probably middle of April when I saw that. I thought that was pretty impressive that he still had his antlers fully intact. But I do most of my shed hunting while turkey hunting, and I find a fair amount of shed antlers every year turkey hunting. Now, granted, I don't get to them as quick as Jackson does, so they're a little gnawed on, and they're bleached a little bit, that kind of thing. But still, it gets an idea what's survived the season, which I think for a lot of hunters and bow hunters, gun hunters, what have you, just knowing what survived that season is a bonus. Then you get to keep the antler as a souvenir, but what's there for next year, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, because at this time, chances are they've survived. Obviously they survived all the seasons, the hunting seasons. They've survived a bulk of the winter. Most of the hardest parts of the winter. So chances are, if you find that antler, there's a good chance that he's going to be around. And still nature. Something may happen between now and next season. You never know, but chances are very good that deer may be around next year. So
now, Hunter, you do this as well?
I'm what you would call a passive shed hunter.
That's me right there. I found a shed. I'm a hunter.
Primarily, if I'm small rabbit hunting or squirrel hunting in the early winter, I'm scouting the ground too, looking for sheds.
Not going to pass up a shed.
Right, exactly. And I've got a question for you here, Jackson. Yeah. So when you're out shed hunting and you're primarily shed hunting on properties you hunt, are you looking for, are you doing it more as a scouting technique for next year, or are you doing it for just out there getting outside in one of those kind of dull seasons where there's not much open to hunt?
There's definitely a huge advantage to scouting late season. And I think if you're a deer hunter and maybe you're frustrated with how your season went, or you're looking to kind of take it to that next level, early or late winter or early spring scouting can be huge. All the foliage is dead. The trails are super obvious. If there's a little bit of snow on the ground, it's going to be extremely obvious where the deer are entering and exiting fields, where they're bedding, especially with snow. You can find those beds. Anybody can find them. They're very obvious. And so that can give you a good idea of where to start thinking about things for next year.
And then, and then as a follow-up question, you've got a pretty good idea already just through game cameras and being out in the woods all fall what deer are there. Mm-hmm. Have you had times where you come across a shed from a deer that you've never seen or you haven't seen before, and it's kind of a pleasant surprise that that buck's in the area?
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. I found sheds that I did not expect to find. I've even had deer show up. They winter on a farm where I never see them during the summer. I don't have any like velvet trail cam pictures of them. I don't see them when I'm hunting, and they only show up like late December, January timeframe. So it's very fascinating to watch how their patterns change throughout the year, and you can kind of try to hypothesize about why that is.
Right.
So yeah, it's just kind of breaking down what's going on. If we could get into a deer's head and learn what they're thinking, I think it would be a very bland experience. But going out there and really trying to figure them out, and the guessing game is a lot of fun.
And I always say there's no better sign of a deer than seeing the deer, or any animal in that case. But I mean, a lot of hunters are out seeking big bucks, and beyond seeing a deer, that's another sign that deer is on your property or wherever you're shed hunting, and kind of a cool way to scout.
Absolutely. Yep. And then, there's just something about antlers for me. Just holding them, getting my hands on them. But then
they're a cool material.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they're just a cool looking thing to begin with, these things, and they're just so fun to collect and have. They are gnarly. Each one's like a thumbprint or fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
No two antlers are ever the same, which makes it unique, because once you find one, it's like that antler, unique only to that antler in the entire world, is now mine. That's kind of cool.
And even as they grow, I mean, you can watch a deer, and as they kind of keep a characteristic or a shape or something to them, but they change and they grow from year to year. I think that's fascinating. But my dog loves them. Katie uses them for decorations every now and again.
I was just going to ask, do you use them for Christmas trees and chandeliers and plates?
I haven't gotten that crazy
Knife
yet.
Scales. Come on, I want to hear all the details.
I have something in the basement that was kind of referred to jokingly as a shrine, and it's
the Antler Pile.
The Antler Pile. Yeah.
Here in the great state of Nebraska, there's a lot of tool sheds in farms and ranches all across the great state of Nebraska that have the antler shrine. Mm-hmm. And I've seen elk antlers and deer antlers, just shed antlers collected over a period of some of these family generational collections over periods 70, 80 years. Sometimes pretty impressive antler shrines. But we do that because we're, it's kind of like almost paying honor or homage to the critter, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're just so fascinated by what they've left that, we collect them. And I think that's really cool. Real quick, hot places for finding shed antlers. I know you like bedding areas, fences where they, crossings, creek bottom crossings where they make tunnels through their funnels through the creeks and whatnot, where they commonly cross.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've found sheds anywhere and everywhere because it's very random. And and it's not, when I say I'm out there scouting, when I find an antler, I don't necessarily go, this is where I need to be next year. Yeah. It's very random. It's so random. But the scouting portion is the sign that I'm looking for while I'm shed hunting. But I mean, I've found them in cornfields, bean fields, like you said, crossings, where they're crossing fences. If they have to jump a fence, those antlers.
Anything that jostles them.
Anything that jostles them, exactly. So I've found them where they jump creeks and stuff like that, are great spots. But typically bedding areas, anywhere where there's some native prairie grasses where they, in the winter, they don't bend over, basically. You see brome grass, and as soon as it dies and you get a little wind, it just falls over. But if you get those really nice stands of grasses, maybe some intermixed cedar trees where those deer are bedding, that can really be the ticket. And that's kind of where I key in on. I kind of have this is where I need to look.
Sure.
And then once I've kind of expended through that, I start to move out a little bit.
And then you find them out in the middle of a field. It's like nothing jostled this deer in the middle of the field, and there's antlers, just both of them just laying there. So pretty cool. Well, we'll expect updates. We'll probably have future podcasts here. We'll expect you to just chime in for a couple minutes to give us updates, bring in some of the collection that you've been finding this year, because out of all of us, you'll probably be adding to that collection more so this year. So
you bet. Absolutely.
All right. So, moving on, of the things that I think are incredibly fun to do this time of year, and it all revolves around hunting, or the great outdoors for that matter, is predator hunting. And now we're really getting into that prime time when it comes to predator hunting, especially calling. Now, weird year. We've had stretches of a few cold days, but then it gets up in the 50s again. And it's really hard to suggest that our predators are hurting real bad when it's 50 degrees out and they're out just, nonchalantly just hunting, or maybe not. Maybe they're soaking up the rays, but they're not, typical year. We've been in cold weather now for a month, and they can be really in tough shape in terms of finding food, and there might be 8-12 inches of snow on the ground, and man, they're really susceptible to calling. This year I think is a little tougher year for that because they're not hurting as much, but calling still works. Anytime you ring the dinner bell, that's apt to bring in any predator really in the area. Here in Nebraska, of course, coyote,
Coyotes
fox.
are the big one. Yeah.
Coyotes are number one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what everybody's after is coyotes. In fact, most people will not become a bobcat hunter simply because they fail to be able to pass on coyotes.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you right now, in order to call bobcats in, a lot of times you got to let those coyotes go. And that's hard for people to do because the first thing that's going to come in is a coyote. Yeah, and then you might see a fox or something like that come in. But usually a coyote's going to be the first thing. And they don't come in very cautiously. It's just kind of like, bumping through the trees as they can't hardly make it to the call. It's kind of like Scooby-Doo almost coming to the call. They just bumbling around trying to get to the call. But they don't come in very stealthily usually. But bobcats, man, they do. They're pretty stealthful, and that takes a long time. So I always tell people, if you want to be a bobcat caller, you probably can't take every coyote that comes in because.
So to put a time frame on that, when you say it's a long time.
So good point. I usually don't spend more than about 25 minutes on coyotes. If I sit down to call coyotes, I'd say 95% of my coyotes are going to come in the first 7 minutes, and after that, I get really sad because I know that the likelihood of a coyote coming in, I'll stay, and I've had coyotes come in late. And I'll talk to some different tactics as you go later into the stand. But my first stand, 20, 25 minutes, nothing comes in, I'm up and out of there to the next stand because it just doesn't make sense to, even if you got you might call a coyote in 45 minutes, but why wait that long? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to wait that long. So whereas bobcats, I might call for over an hour. Hour and a half, 45 minutes, hour and 15, somewhere in there, off and on. And if I know there's bobcats in the area, I'll spend the time, and that's when you might get them to come in. Now, bobcats generally come in in the first 15, 20 minutes on average, maybe 30 minutes, but a lot of bobcats will just take their time, and it's incredible how they can be coming to the call and then stop and scratch their ear, looking around, lose interest real fast, and then all of a sudden you get their attention again. They start coming to the call, and then they stop. And I mean, oh, candy wrapper, oh, grass, squirrel, and so they just lose their interest pretty fast. And so, which also changes how we approach them. With coyotes, I'll do a lot of intermittent calling. Hand calls work great for that, right? And then stop, look around, 20, 30 seconds. And stop, look around. Whereas with bobcats, I try to, and that's where electronic calls really, really do well because I let the call go. I like to just keep the call on, keep their attention. You kind of look at a bobcat, you're pulling them in on the string. Just keep them coming. Don't stop pulling because if you stop pulling, they might stop coming. So you just got to keep coming. Not so much with coyotes. And so. Yeah, the time frame for bobcats much more of a commitment. Your equipment's different, right? If I'm going to sit somewhere for an hour and a half, I'm going to be a little more comfortable. Whereas with coyotes, I can go sit up against a tree, and 15, 20 minutes later, I might be out of there. But with bobcats, I might take a seat with me, kind of like turkey hunting. I might take the turkey chair or a pad or something to sit on because man, hour and a half. That's a commitment. Right. That's a long-term relationship right there. So you gotta take your time.
So how long did it take you, Jeff, to become a bobcat hunter from a coyote hunter? Was there a point in time when you're like, man, I really got to stop taking coyotes and really wait to try to draw a bobcat?
I'm the world's lousiest bobcat caller because I have no patience whatsoever. I can say that you need to not harvest the coyotes because that's what it takes to get the, because I like to harvest the coyotes. If a coyote comes in, I like to take the coyotes. But it was probably, early on, I was probably a teenager when I realized that, and the coyotes were really plentiful at the time. And I realized that, man, I can't shoot every coyote that comes along because I got to think that scares away bobcats. And there would be areas where I'd scout for bobcats and I think, man, I'm going to go there today and I'm going to call in a bobcat. That's my goal. And then if coyote would come in, it's like dilemma time. The first time it happened, I didn't even think about it. I was like, coyote, wait a minute, but I'm hunting bobcats. And I got to think that bobcat's getting closer. Here's a coyote coming in. And gosh darn, do I take the coyote or not? And that's when it dawned on me, I have a decision to make before I get out of the truck. And that is to not take the coyotes every time. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I can't tell you that a gun blast or whatever is going to spook every bobcat, because they hear a lot of noises in nature. So I don't know. Depends on how close they are, what their attention span is and all that. But I know it doesn't help. I know we don't use guns to call bobcats in, so I know it doesn't help. So my first coyote, I was a predator hunter probably at age 10, 11 years old, out on my uncle's farm, and they'd let me go down the creek bottom and hunt squirrels and rabbits. And I'd bought a new Ed Skeery rabbit call that we got at a garage sale. And my mom, it was the worst decision she ever made, let me buy it, because it was me practicing all the time on it. And she was just, that was a horrible sound, I'm sure. Hear that, wah, 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 and that's aside from all the whining me and my brothers did ourselves, and so that was additive, and so she didn't care for that. I can tell you that right now. But age 11 or so, and I take that with me. I have a 22. Now this is how diehard of a handgun hunter I was. I think I probably even went down to the creek bottom with a 22 pistol, not remembering for sure, but I think I did. But anyway, I'm sure I had a 22. Went down the creek bottom and looking for whatever, probably rabbits or something. Sat down, and there's a cornfield out in front of me, and I remember calling, wah, wah, and I got with that call. And I mean, it wasn't 30 seconds. And there was I call, the first time I saw them, like, they're ghosts. I remember thinking they're just like ghosts. And so when I tell people about coyote calling, they're, timber ghosts or field ghosts, because they just appear. And I can tell you to this day, I have no clue how he appeared, because it was an open cornfield. There was a little swale, and I'm sure he came up that little swale from the creek bottom, but right in front of me. 20 yards, staring right at me. And I mean, I darn near swallowed that call. And I remember thinking to myself, this is easy. I mean, this is simple. I have mastered the art of coyote calling at age 11. And it would probably be 2 years before I called my next coyote in. So it wasn't as easy as I thought. That was a fluke, but a cool fluke, because if that doesn't get you going, nothing will get you going. When that top chain predator standing there staring at 20 yards and you're a young kid, that gets your attention fast.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So break down some of the, we talk about the predator calls. We'll get to the howls and stuff. But
Sure.
Talk about some of the different types of distress calls that you use.
Sure.
Obviously, there's the classic cottontail, but there's more than that.
There really is. In fact, I've brought a few others, because there's certainly the classic cottontail, and then of course in Nebraska especially, any animal that doesn't eat other animals is a potential prey species, right? I mean, turkeys are a potential prey species for our predators. Mice are a prey species for our predators. Mouse calls or squeakers are pretty good ones, especially for close range predator hunting. That they're a really good close range. You think the coyotes might be within 100 yards. Start off with a little squeaker and never move on beyond that, because one thing you don't want to do is just blast them out of the creek bottom with a big loud wah, wah. There's just no rabbit ever could make that much noise. So squeakers can be really cool. Rabbits are the number one, because every coyote knows what a rabbit is. They're easy to eat, easy to kill, and they're tasty as can be. So that's always going to be a staple source for us. Birds are an incredible prey species for a lot of our predators, and birds make a very different kind of a sound. So sometimes, especially for bobcats love birds, and I don't know what it is about bobcats. I think it's the shrill sound of those birds, but bobcats really like birds compared to coyotes. Coyotes like the bigger, meatier critters.
It's like that's just a cat thing. I mean,
Could be cat and bird.
Cats just love birds. Yeah.
Cat and mouse, cat and bird, whatever. But
that should make sense.
Yeah, cats like birds, and and bobcats really do. And this one's a little bit louder. And with a bird, and you can do that. This is a split reed.
It's kind of got a trill to it.
Yeah, you can do that with a single reed. And all I'm doing there is I'm rattling my tongue as a bird when a bird's got that really choppy kind of rattled squeak to it, and so I'm blowing into the reed. And I'm getting right on the edge, because this is a cottontail rabbit call. But I'm just getting way out on the edge. And when I get way out on the edge, that's where I get that really shrill, high-pitched bird sound. and it's intense. And so it's a fairly intense sound. So the beauty of it is it's loud and shrill, and it brings cats in. The negative of doing that with these hand calls is that's a lot of work to keep that level of sound up. That's where electronics come in, because then you can put a woodpecker, dying woodpecker on there or whatever, and it sounds very similar to that, and it just can go constantly, and you're not having to huff and puff it, because that's a lot of work. To keep that level of sound going.
Well, I'm sure there's an advantage to kind of switching it up, because predator hunting has become a lot more popular recently. And so 15, 20 years ago, I'm sure when a coyote hears a rabbit in distress, they don't have to think twice. Now, I mean, that's the popular one. That's what probably 90% of people. That's a guess, but it's what you hear.
It really is.
So you can change it up, and that's
it really helps, because if you're hunting areas that get called a lot, and you go in there with the same sound everybody else uses, and that's even a challenge for people who like to use the electronic calls, right? Because many people don't take electronic calls and download weird sounds. They use whatever came with the call. And how many people are walking out there with Fox Pro calls, right? Or whatever. Fox Pro is a great one, but there's a lot of calls out there. And how many people walk out of the store, and so the coyote's hearing, rabbit number 3, all winter long, right? And so rabbit number 3, or dying jack number 4 is probably not going to be the one that always gets their attention anymore, especially if they've been shot at once or twice, because of that sound. So, so one of the things I like to do with electronic calls is download different sounds, and I don't care if it's a Himalayan shrew or whatever. One person told me, well, if it's not native in Nebraska, that'll spook them. No, it won't spook them. It's the sound of anything that's dying or crying will get their attention. I don't think it really matters. I've had success with not African peacock, but it's something South American peacock or something like that. And man, they make a weird sound when they're in distress, and just brought coyotes right in. Why? Because it's a distress of a prey species.
And curiosity.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be like, what the heck
They
is
know
that?
what cries and screams mean.
Yeah.
And so they're going to that.
So, like shed hunting, my coyote hunting adventures have been more passive too, and I think a lot of deer hunters see coyotes when they're deer hunting. And the question I have is, most of the coyotes I've seen while I'm out hunting is during the day, and I've had opportunities and have taken coyotes when I'm deer hunting. But what is your preferred time to hunt predators, specifically coyotes, and get into bobcats too?
Sure, good question. First, we have to clear up coyotes. That's an Eastern term right there. That's coyote, not coyotes. That's Bugs Bunny. But anyway, just picking on you, Hunter. But
Missouri.
favorite time is early morning, and that's when I have the most success. Back in the day when I first started, I was a teenager, and I was able to start, getting more mobile. I'd go out with friends. We'd go out at night, and hunt coyotes, and we'd see quite a bit of fox at night as well, which I always thought was kind of cool. In fact, I always thought, for my first several years of predator hunting, that the only way to call in fox had to be at night, because that's when we'd see them moving around. But then I've since learned that early morning, just when it's getting light enough to see, is a great time. Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems from they've been out hunting throughout the evening, but they may or may not have been successful, and they coming back to a place of security, and I can more easily find them that way, because I do my scouting. I know where they're denning up, or where they're going to be denned, or just finding places where they're going to be hanging around, after they've been hunting all night long, and so I can go to those areas and set up in the morning, early morning, and I know they're getting close to being in those areas usually, and so they're kind of a core area for them. So I have success doing that. Late evening can be really good too. How many of you have been out deer hunting, and right at dusk you start to hear that and it just sounds like there must be 1,000 of them in the field, and it's like 2 or 3 coyotes that are just making a howling noise, and so that can be really good to howl back to them in the evening and get their attention. They're very territorial, and they're howling to kind of see who else is out there and if there's any intruders. And if I howl back, sometimes that's all it takes to get them to come right to you. But most of my success has been in the early morning, and the colder the better.
Earlier you said when you're scouting and you're like, this is a bobcat. This screams bobcat area. What are you looking for? Because coyotes can be anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coyotes
absolutely.
are kind of jack of all trades.
They really are. In fact, scouting for coyotes in Nebraska can be pretty simple. You get up on a hill and you look down and you see a creek bottom, a lot of wooded area and pasture or something. There's gonna be coyotes in there somewhere. You just gotta assume so, and then you can put a little effort into it. I can ask landowners. That's the best way to scout. Do you see any bobcats? Oh yeah, they're always over on that corner of that field over there, crossing the corner in that field over there. Now, my next question is, how many times do you see them doing that? Well, we saw them for sure one time there. Well, that maybe not be the best, but every night. That's a good thing to key in on right there. So landowners are the best because, if they're letting you coyote hunt, they're not protecting the coyotes. They're not over here going, you're going to figure it out for yourself, buddy. I'm not giving you any. They're like, they're going to be right there, 6 o'clock, put your bucket there and sit down because they want you to take the coyotes. And so they're the best as far as I'm concerned. And once I get some information from landowners that tell me, it's that 40 over there or that's over in that pastures where they hear them, then I might go out and in the evening and howl. And, I might just, go up, park in the by the gate and just howl and see if I hear any howls back. And if I do, then I know, okay, that's where they're at over here at night in this creek bottom, somewhere in that creek bottom. I don't need to know exactly where. I just need to know kind of a general vicinity. I can call them out of that creek bottom no matter where they're at if they're in there, and they're going to be susceptible. So for coyotes, it's pretty easy. You can do a horn and a siren, and they'll start howling a lot of times. And so it doesn't take a lot of genius to find coyotes. But then after I go in the area and I really want to get scouting, I'll go in and look for scat and tracks. And once I find scat and tracks, and I can kind of understand where they're going to, at night, where they're leaving from or where they're coming back from, and get a better idea that, there's just like deer hunters, you can look at a field and say, a swale or, a bend in the field or a swale, that's a good place to look for tracks because a lot of times they're going to want to come up to that swale to kind of hide themselves. They don't like to just get right up on a ridge top a lot of times. And so I go look at those areas. Fence lines are a great place to find tracks along, creek bottoms adjacent to fields and whatnot. And so those are easy places to find, and the same with bobcats. Scat and tracks are going to be, and bobcats aren't making a lot of noise until we get to their breeding season, which they'll make a little bit of noise, but right outside of that, they're not a real noisy critter to begin with. So you're basically looking for clues they'll leave behind in order to make sure that, there's bobcats in that area. But even outside of that, if the landowner says, behind that woodshed over there down in the pasture, I see them there at night, I know there's bobcats in there in that area. So I know that's probably a spot I'm going to set up in. And then I look at the area and try to get an idea. They're not living in the cornfield. I mean, that's not where they're sleeping. And so I look at the area, try to get an idea where they're probably hanging out during the day, where they're hiding. And wood piles are great for bobcats. And if I see a bunch of little wood piles or areas where the farmer might have bulldozed a bunch of trees or cut a bunch of trees over and fell them and pushed them into a pile. I find those all the time, and those are just great for bobcats. And so I might set up specifically on some of those areas and try to call a bobcat right out of that little area.
So once you find your area and you sit there and you don't see anything, you get up and move. Do you move to a different part of the property, to a totally different property? How do you kind of go about different locations?
Real good question, and it really depends on a lot of factors. But generally speaking, half mile is a good move. If I stay within that half mile, I get the feeling that if they're there, they still hear me. Why didn't they come in? However, I have moved from one side of the field to the other, and then called coyotes in. And I have to chalk that up that they just weren't ready. They just weren't willing to come all the way across the field. But when I moved to the other side of the field, it was just a little closer for them. Or they might have had an approach that was more protected, and they felt like they could. The worst thing a coyote I think wants to avoid is expending a ton of energy, getting up, running all the way across this field with snow, a foot of snow, and having to go all through traipsing through all that snow just to get to a spot where I heard a dying rabbit to find that he's not there. And I'm sure that happens to them. They get there and something's eating it, or it moved off, or they can't find it. And so when they think that it's a long ways away, or the approach is going to take a lot of work, and then the other side of the field might be easier for them. So there's that. But generally a half mile is where they're not going to go beyond that usually. And so if I move a half mile, I'm pretty confident I'm calling to different critters at that point in time. If it's real windy out, I might only move a few hundred yards. And again, always play in the wind because you'll never fool them. when it comes to wind, but I might just move a few hundred yards, again, other side of the field, or a different area where I can still approach without being seen and set up again that's just that much closer to where I think they might be down this creek bottom, for example, or this pasture. And so I might just a different corner of the field. And so it depends on a lot of factors.
Gotcha. When you're talking about your setup, I know coyotes have an amazing sense of smell.
Yeah.
So that's obviously something you got to think about. How often are you considering them? Like, I guess, how much thought process do you put into them trying to swing downwind?
That's a good question too, because they pretty much always will. There's very few times that they just come straight up, straight upwind from me, and straight into me. A lot of times they're going to kind of circle around and try to, kind of quarter around and come upwind, just like a hunting dog will, right? Yeah. Hunting dog likes to turn around and try to come up in the wind and then find that pheasant. Same with coyotes. And so if I think if the wind's coming from, say, the north and I'm south, I really think I'm going to take that coyote probably east or west, because I can see what he's going to do, and I know he's not going to come straight down toward the sound. A lot of times they're going to skirt around and try to come back around, and that's where I usually will take them, because they're not going to come straight in a lot of times. And once they get around you, if you don't protect that quartering angle, that quartering side, they'll just skirt around you, pick up your scent. And, I hate to say it, guys, we all stink when it comes to coyotes. They've proven that to me. Let me tell you right now, you'll never see them after that. And so they're not going to come upwind. I can guarantee you that.
Yep.
So now we've talked, we've talked about some of your tactics, some of your equipment. If I'm a deer hunter or a small game hunter looking to get into a little predator hunting in the fall, or even a recreational shooter, I have a lot of the gear and equipment I need already. What are the one or two things you would say that are essential if I'm just starting out getting into predator hunting?
That's a great question, and you likely have the gear you need already. The only thing you really need, because if you're a deer hunter, squirrel hunter, you probably got a gun, you got camouflage, you probably got a ground seat, something to keep you comfortable when you're sitting on the ground. The only thing you need is go out by a call and learn how to use the call. And the closed reed call is going to be the simplest to use. That's what I recommend a person start out with. And then these open reed calls, once you figured out the closed reed call, play with these open reed calls. But these are much more simplistic in how to use them. And then you just got to keep in mind that a rabbit or a squirrel or, their lungs are that big. And so our lungs are that big. So don't overdo it, because it won't sound real if it sounds like the rabbit's the size of a kangaroo. That's what they're keying into. I don't think any rabbit dies the same, so you can't say that cry and scream doesn't sound right. They all cry and scream just slightly differently, but it's the cadence that I think is very similar. Just like when people talk, we have a cadence that we talk with that's very similar. We all have different voices and different styles and different inflections, but the cadence at which we talk is very, very similar. And I think when it comes to cries and screams on a lot of different prey species, it's also very similar. But and so that's what I try to mimic. If you've ever heard a dying rabbit, which is the easiest one to mimic, you can do that with your mouth. You don't even need to call for that. It's just a simple, that. I've called coyote. In fact, did so this spring with my nephew. Called coyotes without a call, because you don't really need to just do a dying rabbit. It's pretty simple. It's when you really want to put a ton of inflection in, that kind of thing, that the call comes in handy. But learning to master the call, and learning that you don't want to have a coyote come around the corner where you're sitting there blowing into a call, because the gig is up. Nobody's that fast, and so you gotta always think in terms of when am I going to take this coyote? When it comes in, where do I want it to come in at? And when am I going to be able to take this animal? And am I going to be in a position to take the animal? And I've watched so many novice hunters who over the years who had no plan for ditching the call and picking up the shotgun or the rifle or the pistol or whatever. And so, they learn, if you don't plan the first time, you'll learn after that, right? Because you're sitting there holding a call, putting all your effort in the call, your gun's laying on the ground. You're not you have no chance because those coyotes come in fast.
Kind of like rattling a deer. You always got to keep your head
Always
on
have a plan
head
to
on a
ditch the
swivel.
antlers.
I got busted this year.
Yeah, you always get busted at least once.
Yep.
And after that, I remember putting in the tree stand, hooks specifically for my antlers. And on one stand, I put a pad up against the tree because it was just loud. And when I could put my antlers up there, they hit the pad and it didn't clang against the tree. And because you always have to have a quick plan. And in recent years, it's been to put my antlers right behind me on the seat behind me when I stand up. Yep. And because usually I can put them together and put them behind me without a lot of movement. But have a plan because you can't rattle antlers and shoot at the same time. You can't call and shoot real easy at the same time either.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about, kind of gear and guns and stuff, is a good one. And I kind of tailor mine. I'm not an expert. I maybe do this once or twice a year, but I tailor mine. I've got a shotgun that I use, and I've got buckshot, and they used to heavy shot made like a dead coyote round, and I don't shoot it very often. I've still got almost a full box, but when it's real thick, there's a spot on the river that we call, and we're in the thick of it. I mean, our farthest shot's going to be 30 yards.
Sure. But
then some parts of Nebraska, sandhills, you really want a flat shooting gun. You want something that's light recoil. And if you're in it for the fur, you got to think about that as well.
Sure.
I'm not. I'm just a fawn saver.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that either, right?
Yep.
And so, anything from your deer rifle will work fine. Diehards, the 223 is one of my favorites, and that comes in a variety of flavors, from bolt action rifles to AR-15s to all kinds of rifles in between, or handguns in between. But the 223 has just ample amount of velocity and power, but small little 22 caliber bullet, and so it can work really well, especially if you get the real frangible bullets that go into the coyote but don't make an exit. They just kind of come apart inside the coyote, and they anchor them really fast. 22-250 is a great one. It's especially for reaching out. You get in the sandhills, you'll really appreciate a 22-250, 220 Swift. The 204 Ruger is a great one, but it's probably on the lower side in terms of caliber and whatnot. I'm not a big fan of the rimfires. I don't care if it's a 17 or a 22. I'm not a big fan of the rimfires on coyotes. Up to about fox, and I think 17 Hummer is a great round for up to and including fox, raccoons, that kind of thing. But beyond that, I think you need at least a 22 calibers when it comes to predators. And honestly, the 243 or the 24 calibers aren't a bad choice. I remember years ago the gun writers, Elmer Keith and Jack O'Connor. And Jack O'Connor was a big 270 fan. Elmer Keith was a big big bore fan, and he made the comment about Jack O'Connor's rifle that it makes a great coyote rifle. Well, I don't think a 270 is a great coyote rifle. I think that's way overkill. But 22 to 24 is about perfect. It's about the right zone for just about any coyote or size predator.
Cool. Awesome. You do have a decoy here, so talk about decoys real quick.
And real quick, 20 years ago, I started using decoys. I used my wife's rabbit fur hat, and that was almost a really great idea until I saw a red-tailed hawk taking her rabbit fur hat over the top of the tree line that I was hunting on, and I spent the entire morning trying to figure out what I was going to say to my wife about that. How are you going to believe that, right? And when I got to the other side of the tree line, it had dropped behind the trees over there, so I got the hat back. But anyway, but the one thing that didn't have was movement, and movement when it comes to predators, especially bobcat, is key. And these little things here, furry-looking type deal, it sits in the snow, and all of a sudden it does that little whirly-gig, twirly thing like that, and it'll take the attention right off of the collar. I don't care what you're doing. I think there's times I could have stood up and said hello, and those coyotes wouldn't have cared when they were so fixated on this. I learned how to do this with like I said, furry things like stuffed animals, rabbit hat, that kind of stuff. Years ago, I was turkey hunting up along the Niobrara, and I remember a coyote come stalking my turkey decoy, and it was so intent on that turkey decoy, that hen turkey, that there's nothing I think I could have done, because I remember thinking to myself, if I want to take a shot on this coyote the way he's coming, I'm going to have to move my position a little bit. And as I kind of jostled and moved my position, he had no clue. I mean, he just could care less. In fact, I think there's that decoy is retired now, but that's the decoy, and I've got little BB holes in that decoy. I can tell you right now, it's not from turkey hunting. That's how close he got, and that one was in midair. He could care less that I was there. But it really told me that decoys work, and it's probably one of the few times that I could say I really decoyed a coyote in. And so after that, I looked for all their options, and I said, stuffed teddy bears, that kind of stuff. But these things with movement, are great. Now, if you're a turkey hunter or you just find turkey feathers, the tail feather of a turkey is also an incredible decoy. And all you do is you take the shaft of that turkey tail feather and you take a needle with monofilament line and stick it through there, and then tie the monofilament line to it, and then tie an anchor of some sort. You can it can be a fish weight or whatever, about a foot from that on that line, and then you go out the field and you just take that anchor and drape it over a little branch of a shrub, and that turkey feather just sits there in the air. And funny thing about a turkey feather, old timers do this as well to determine in their tent or their cabin if they're getting any heat off the stove, because that heat would move by that turkey feather and it'd flutter a little bit in the air. And so at the slightest movement, that turkey feather will flutter. And I've had bobcats just come in staring at that thing. And so that's the cheapest way to make a decoy. But if you want to make sure that you place it where you want it and that it's going to move when you want it to move, these little things like this critter here, I think it's called the critter, it's a mojo, I think, those things work really good, and they just keep their attention coming in, and especially for bobcats that need convincing. But more often than not, when I shoot a coyote, the last thing he's ever going to see, he's looking straight at this thing right here. Could care less about the rest of the world. He's looking right at this thing, moving it around in circles, and that takes a lot of pressure off you when you're taking the safety off and bringing a shotgun or a handgun or drawing your bow. I'm convinced you can draw your bow with these things and they'll hardly ever look at you because they're so focused on the decoy. So yeah, neat investment for $30, and you got something. Works for squirrels too. Squirrels love to sit in the tree and squawk at this thing when it's moving, and it's one of the things that I take with me squirrel hunting a lot too. So it has a lot of purpose.
Interesting.
We've had a lot of fun here. I think we have to wrap it up, or we getting close? Yeah, we've had a lot of fun. We could spend a part 2 on going through how to use all the different calls and all that, but I think people get the gist of it. The cool thing about predator hunting, keep your nose to the wind, camouflage yourself, and learn how to use a call. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be able to make sound. No animals cry the same. Get out there and mimic what you hear. You can go online, Google it. You can go online and find all kinds of sounds to mimic. Go out in the field and mimic any one of those sounds. I guarantee you, stay with it, and I guarantee you'll find success. It may not come the first time, but third or fourth time out, just takes that first time and you're hooked.
Awesome. All right.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Hunt Nebraska, brought to you by your Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.